Hey there, Barry. Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome to Critical Media Studies Podcast After Dark.
After dark, man.
After
This is
dark.
it's a change, but here we are. Anyways, welcome back. It's good to see you. It's good to be with you. Um, Today we are going to start something different. And this is not a change in focus, but we've got a bold project on tap, in that we are going to be looking at a much longer text than we usually do. One of our listeners had asked us if we would be interested in doing something on the Frankfurt School, particularly Horkheimer and Adorno. So we said, sure, that'd be an interesting thing to look at. And we were looking at the Dialectic of Enlightenment, specifically the chapter on Odysseus and myth. That was going to be what we did. And quickly changed our minds and decided, hey, why do one chapter when you can do the entire why do one when you can do it all? But I think it's a kind of important that we take a minute to explain the rationale behind this, because this is not easygoing. This is not light, feathery reading. But for my own part, this was I don't even know how to say it. This felt like something that needed more attention than a single chapter, because the argument seems much bigger and much more timely and much more nuanced than I had originally assumed when I dug in. So my response was, wow, no, there's a bigger argument that needs to be discussed. But I think you had you had a similar response.
No, I had a similar response, and I made a joke that I think I made a joke, and then all of a sudden we looked at each other and we said, "Hey, well, maybe your joke isn't that silly, or maybe there's a truth in the joke." But I think I made a remark about how incredibly rich the Odysseus chapter is. It's not just deep; it's just like it's far. I mean, they're polymaths, right? Adorno, Horkheimer. They seem to know everything. They're writing from a position where they're philosophically and historically informed. And so it's so rich and deep that I think I just made the passing joke and said, we could just do this whole book for the rest of our lives. And then all of a sudden, Michael said, hey, why not?
Why
But
not?
also what you were saying, Michael, I think very quickly we both remarked on the fact that, and I guess I can give some background of the book, that to sort of flesh out or to augment why it's timely. Theodore Adorno and Horkheimer, they're writing this book in the early 40s,
44.
44. They're publishing it. They're publishing it soon after the war. They're Jewish academics in exile from Nazi Germany.
Mm-hmm.
They're writing during wartime. Part of their, one of the impetuses, the explicit impetus for this is explaining, why fascism? Why not revolution? Why not Marxist revolution? Why did instead of, Marxist revolution, why do we have fascism? So they are writing with that question of whither fascism? Why fascism? They're asking with those questions very much in mind. And so I think we both felt, well, timely for our moment as well for that reason.
Yeah. So what got me was the approach to this, right? So the title in one way says it all, but still leaves so much to be discussed. So I think, if we want to start with the central argument of the book, and we maybe treat this first installment as a primer for what's going to come, and I think that's the plan, right? Is that we will talk about the introduction of Dialectic of Enlightenment, which is the concept of enlightenment today, and sort of see if we can use this to get our sea legs. And then we'll follow this up with Odysseus, then Juliet, then the culture industry, and then then the limits of enlightenment. The title is fascinating to me because I'd never conceived of the Enlightenment in problematic terms before, right? Like we are,
or as a problem,
yeah. I mean, we're conditioned to, I think, especially as an academic, to think of this as, wow, well, this is the growth of knowledge. This is, you know, the distancing ourselves from myth, and it was an incredibly interesting take. So if we talk about enlightenment and a dialectical approach to enlightenment, for me, this was already new ground, right?
New
Like,
ground, right?
so,
And I think new ground for most people.
mm,
Did you want to add something, or
no, go
I'll
ahead,
talk a little bit about?
yeah.
Well, I think you're right. I think for most people, and certainly at the time that this was written, I mean, there are great 19th century philosophers and writers who started questioning the notion of progress in the wake of industrialism, and started thinking that, you know, nothing else, the Industrial Revolution had its downsides. So, you know, there has been a sort of questioning about the price of progress and what it means for human living conditions and also the environment, right? Eco criticism and environmental concerns kind of begin in the 19th century. So there have been critics of progress even in the 19th century at the height of the belief in progress. Still, I dare say that you know, the notion of the notion of progress, and that the Enlightenment, scientific enlightenment, enlightenment reason, is a key to scientific progress, and that scientific progress is both good and linear. I think that idea, I don't think it died in 1944 when Adorno were writing. You know, they were writing. I'm just saying that they're writing against the grain. Even in 1944, in the height of the war, I'm sure there were people who were still thinking Hitler is an aberration. Hitler's an aberration. You know, and that if we can just win this war, you know, we're going to get back on the course of progress. And what do you think? I mean, I think a sort of intuitive, a rather naive progressivism, belief in progress, and belief in science, that science is going to have all the answers. I don't think that's outdated yet. Even in the middle of our tradition, right?
Not only do I
Right.
think that it's not outdated, I think, quite frankly, it's as in vogue as it's ever been.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
This idea that well, paradoxically, right? I think we have one camp that is fully engaged with the math, the numbers, the science, and then we have a second group which has completely turned its back on the math, the science, numbers. I mean, there's an interesting schism there. The thing for me, and I think maybe this is a good sort of springboard to actually start to talk about the argument, maybe at a more granular level, is this idea about their relationship to the Enlightenment, okay? And that it's not, so they're not taking the position that the Enlightenment, as we conceive of it, or scientific progress, or a faith in science, or a faith in knowledge, is bad,
is negative, is
right?
wholly negative.
Right. That's not the read that I get out of it at all. I think rather what they're looking at is that, you know, consistent linear progress that must be, right? That there's, I think the line that struck me in this, and it's a very short, right? It's on page 4 of my version of this, just enlightenment is totalitarian. And okay,
how could that be?
And but this idea that it is all knowing, that we can know everything, that everything has a preferred or an optimal position and role, and sequencing, if you will, that struck me as novel, and well, it struck me as novel, right? And so the mission of the Enlightenment, this argument, I guess, as I understand it, is that the Enlightenment has tried to distance us from myth, right? Like the Enlightenment
That's the project of the Enlightenment.
is a period of maturation, of growing up, right? We have reached a point where we are done with the silly belief in myth and doctrine, and that now all things can be known and proved, and that science and efficiency are key. I mean, there's I pick up, like, I'm seeing Ellul's argument here, right, with this move towards efficiency and perfection.
Sure.
And
Sure.
you know, the argument they make is that this is totalitarian, and that in many ways it is no different than myth. That
Mhm.
the Enlightenment's project to distance itself from myth and usher us into an age of knowledge and science is still mythical. We're just using a different
Mhm.
framing
Mhm.
for it. And man, I had never considered that.
Mhm.
And it took me a long time to even wrap my head around how this is possible. So maybe we should talk a few minutes about unpacking this.
Mhm. Well, I think that just to remark on a couple things that you brought up, it's not so much the title's doing a lot of heavy lifting, and so I'll talk a little bit about the title. But as you mentioned, it's not so much that enlightenment in itself is totalitarian. Like you picked that was a great pull quote you picked. But it isn't so much, as I understand it, it isn't so much that the enlightenment is totalitarian, but as you mentioned, the project of enlightenment or the insistence that enlightenment, and gets us directly to the title, the insistence that enlightenment is enlightenment, that it's identical to itself, that enlightenment exists as the opposite of myth, the polar opposite of myth. And that's implicit not necessarily in the dialectic of enlightenment or the concept of enlightenment, but it's certainly implicit in the explicit, even in the project of enlightenment.
Right.
That in order to enact enlightenment, you have to proceed as if that there is no contradiction that exists within the concept of enlightenment. So that enlightenment stands as, in the mind of the enlightener, the progressive enlightener, enlightenment stands as the total polar opposite, the binary opposite to myth, which needs to be utterly vanquished in order for enlightenment to reign supreme. The project of enlightenment to vanquish myth is a total misunderstanding, and that, I think, is what's the totalitarian. That's the totalitarian aspect of enlightenment that they're speaking.
I think we should play a game.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw some lines at you.
You're gonna throw.
And I think no. Well,
We are going to turn the Dialectic of Enlightenment into a quiz game. I'm ready for it. It is indeed
these are
Media Studies podcast after dark.
This is a carefully curated list of pull quotes here.
Okay.
But
all right.
But I think there's a few things that I want to talk about in terms of understanding how the project comes together and being able to say, look, enlightenment is the move into knowledge and reason and science, and we're distancing ourselves from myth, but they're able to say these two come back together. And so there's a couple interesting moments that I think we should talk about. Here we go.
All right.
Ready? I'm going to dance around a little bit here. Humans believe themselves free of fear when there is no longer anything unknown. Okay.
Right.
So this is the idea that the Enlightenment is liberating. We can know. Okay. Enlightenment is mythical fear radicalized. The pure immanence of positivism, its ultimate product, is nothing other than a form of universal taboo. Nothing is allowed to remain outside, since the mere idea of outside is the source of fear.
That right there, that sentence, read that last sentence one more time, because I have a quick
Nothing is allowed to remain outside, and this is outside of our knowledge base,
outside of the knowledge base of enlightenment.
Since the mere idea of outside is the source of fear.
My quick comment.
Let it rip.
That is the essence that explains the first quote you gave me, the first quote you read. Enlightenment is totalitarian simply because it does not allow an outside. That's it. I mean, you just explained it. That's their reason for enlightenment being totalitarian. That's what they mean by that. Now, I think one of the other passages you read suggests, I'm going to go back to the title to sort of gloss it. One of the sentences, there's a sentence that you read that talked about radicalized. Enlightenment is myth radicalized, or let me gloss that sentence in relation to the title, Dialectic of Enlightenment. And also, I think when I do that, I think I'm also, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm kind of laying out the argument that Adorno, Horkheimer elaborate in this first introductory chapter, the Concept of Enlightenment. What they're saying in that statement, but what they do throughout the book, and certainly in this introductory chapter, the Concept of Enlightenment, is they're always insisting on a dialectical understanding of both enlightenment and myth, so that this is their characteristic move, not only in the introduction, but we're going to see it throughout. They point to enlightenment and they find the mythic structure or the mythic overlay or the residual mythic patterns in the claims of Enlightenment thinkers. Likewise, they go into myth, and this is, to me, is one of the most striking things about the Concept of Enlightenment chapter, which they're going to pick up and continue in their reading, their really radical and weird, odd reading of the Odyssey that basically assumes that Odysseus is a bourgeois from the 19th century, from the 19th century.
I'll tell you though, I'm excited to talk about that, because what they did with fitting the story of Odysseus into
ultimate retrofitting, right,
is masterful.
No, it's retrofit. But this is an example, again, the title, Dialectic of Enlightenment. Enlightenment has its mythic residue or its mythic component. One of the things they do in the Odysseus and myth chapter, and certainly in the Concept of Enlightenment chapter throughout the book, they note that myth itself contains Enlightenment ideas.
Right.
It's easy, in other words, it's easy this is why it's a dialectic of enlightenment. What that means is that it's easy for enlightenment to become myth and for myth to become enlightenment, right? These notions are never stable. Enlightenment thinkers want to think that enlightenment is a stable thing. When they do that, they become totalitarian. That's kind of close to my soundbite in this book, I think. That when Enlightenment thinkers, insist that they have the unified true idea of enlightenment, they become totalizing thinkers and usually horrible genocidal politicians.
Okay, so good. Here we go. Next one. You stole one from me with that explanation. But it works. Okay. So, okay. The more completely the machinery of thought subjugates existence, the more blindly it is satisfied with reproducing it. Enlightenment thereby regresses to the mythology that has never been able to escape. For mythology had reflected in its forms the essence of the existing order, cyclical motion, fate, domination of the world as truth, and had renounced hope.
Well, I got a little bit lost in the last sentence, but I think I understood the first sentence enough to say that, more example of what we were saying a moment ago, that enlightenment can turn into myth. Myth can turn into enlightenment, or has contains within it aspects of enlightenment. To pretend otherwise is bad juju. To pretend otherwise is has totalitarian implications. So
here is, and this,
you got to dialecticize it.
Right.
You got to dialecticize.
So another theme that pops up throughout here is domination, barbarism. These are all terms we're going to come to. Okay. And so the reason I included that last line, and let's revisit it for a second, because I think that this is a nice, succinct explanation of how we have Enlightenment as a totalitarianism influence.
I don't think I quite processed it or heard it. So I definitely want you to reread that last one.
It's
So
late.
let's hear it.
It's
It's
late.
late.
So here we go. Mythology had reflected in its forms the essence of the existing order, cyclical motion, fate, domination, and the world is truth, and had renounced hope. So the argument that I see in this, their understanding of mythology, is that the social order that is
has to stay the same forever.
Exactly. It
has
must
to stay the same forever.
And in doing so, it reproduces that domination.
Yeah, I got you.
And so this is
absolutely that's what it does. That's what it does, is reproduce the domination.
But
that's what the myth does.
But if it is unchanging, if it is a thing,
agreed.
So what else is mathematics? What else is science other than understanding the stable,
unchanging order,
reproducible, unchanging world that we have?
Right.
And so what they have basically done is they have taken, what does he call it? The essence of the existing order, the forms, right? This is Plato, right? This is the perfect model of things. This is science and mathematics.
Plato believes in numbers,
right? And we have used this to reproduce, and I think they would argue and will argue, justify the reproduction of domination. And so the return to barbarism, as I'm return to barbarism, as I'm understanding it, is this step forward into science, right? Into knowledge as power, as into efficiency, as I hate doing air quotes, my God, I'm sorry, as a step forward, which is really just a step back into the repeating cycle.
Right. Absolutely.
I got
what wonderfully done. I mean, that passage, did you pick that before, or we got on the air?
I'm not
here. But can I say that what I love about what you just did is, I mean, you're showing the ways in which, and again, the title, this is about the dialectics of enlightenment. Their prose is, you explicated their technique, what they're trying to do in their prose, and you fought that sentence, really exemplified it, and I loved your gloss of it. What they're really trying to do is, by saying a dialectic of enlightenment, and by saying that enlightenment believes that myth is its other, then what's happening, what's their book trying to do? It's going to always try to do a flip, and it's going to try to show the reader the ways in which one flips into the other, in which there's a constant kind of sachet, a constant reversal, that in the course of time, enlightenment becomes myth, myth becomes enlightenment, and that it's always unstable.
Mm-hmm.
The danger comes when somebody politically tries to stabilize it. And one last thing about what you said about myth. I mean, that's exactly right. While they're, and this gets back to another thing you mentioned this at the opening of the episode, Michael. This is not just a simple critique of enlightenment. Oh, bad enlightenment. Mm-hmm. It's not simply a critique. And actually, the passage that you cited is interestingly dialectical and open in this regard. So on the one hand, it criticizes mythic regimes. You got the critique of mythic regimes from the Adorno Horkheimer point of view. The critique of it is that myth has no hope. Myth has no hope. It offers no hope. It just tells you how the universe is, and you have rituals that perpetuate the state of the universe, that perpetuate the status quo. So that's the bad thing of myth. And let me just say one thing before just the other side, because it's important. But so there's a critique. This is typical of the book. This is why I think it's important. There's a critique of myth, right? Myth gives you no hope. Because it gives you no hope, it's always reproducing the status quo. Now, on the other hand, proof that this book is not simply enlightenment, bad juju, enlightenment, bad thing. What enlightenment gives you, and it's a positive thing according to Adorno and Horkheimer, I think, is hope.
And see, this is where I wanted to jump in and say, this is where things got difficult. Okay, no, hold on. This is not the only place things got difficult.
Things stay difficult in this book for this reason, because they're always moving into the opposite. Right?
Yeah, and it's trying to situate what exactly their take on this is. And it is, I think it's important to note that the argument is not enlightenment bad. I think it's simply God, I can't say it simply. I think rather it is a caution to, to sell out wholesale for efficiency, or to sell out wholesale for science. And I'm curious, there are a couple mentions in this chapter about the role about art, but it's not really, I mean, I think we're going to deal with this more with Juliet and sort of well, I think we'll deal with this more elsewhere. We don't need to bring this up now.
We're definitely going to deal with it in the Odysseus and Myth chapter. Actually, the Sirens episode kind of represents art.
Okay, I think yes. So I think maybe let's take a second to talk about how and why it is we're taking a text from the 1940s, and both of us had this moment where, like, I think you said something to the effect, I'll paraphrase your words, this is one of the most significant texts.
Yeah, I did. I said that. Yeah.
For us to be looking at. And so I think,
well, let me do all my hyperbole. When I was rereading Odysseus and Myth, I said, this may be the best work of theory in the 20th century.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how we come to that conclusion. Okay. And I'm feeling less hyperbolic perhaps than you. So I'm going to go first and let you, come over top afterwards. But the thing for me was, as I'm being forced to reconsider the implications of the Enlightenment, I'm looking at where we are now in a land of big data and surveillance, connectivity, a constant state of acceleration. And I'm thinking,
with the idea that acceleration equals progress, right?
Well, if it's not progress, it's certainly preferable or better
than the previous state of being.
Yes. And so it seems to me that I'm not going to say, because unlike I have hope. I'm not going to be a mythical creature or a prisoner of the Enlightenment. I have hope. So I'm not going to say that we're living in a totalitarian regime, or that we are utterly dominated, or that we have returned to a state of barbarism. But I am going to say that I think that a lot of the hallmarks of enlightenment,
of totalitarian enlightenment,
thank you, are really, really front and center now. I don't have to ever go far to see. We were talking about this off before we got together to record, about the article in the Atlantic about privacy and how, or surveillance, about how we are willingly and eagerly paying to be surveilled, right? Like this notion of the cost being less than the benefit. And I think that's a very scary way of existing. But I also think that is simply the way that is the current right now. And I don't know that fighting it is, I don't even know that you can fight it. And so I think that the arguments here play to a frightening degree in our current setup. And that to me is the interest in looking at Horkheimer and Adorno. As much as I think this is fun, I think this is wildly applicable, and quite frankly, just another reason to stay up late and drink whiskey.
Michael, do you, when you're talking about totalitarian enlightenment, totalitarianism that you're seeing around you, are you mostly talking about digital culture? Or exclusively talking about I'm just talking about what you were talking about right there. What were you referring to in your last
Well,
minute or two?
I am certainly talking about digital culture, but I think that it's important to maybe make the comment that all culture is digital culture now.
Ooh,
You know, and
who
I'm
read
sure
Stiegler in
I'm
this Zoom
sure.
chat?
What's that? I'm sorry. What's that?
Who read Stiegler in this Zoom chat here?
I mean, I'm sure somebody's listening and their hair just stood up and they're like, "Oh, what's the email address? I'm gonna crush this guy." And that's fine. You know, I can be crushed. But no, I think that I don't know that we can step outside of digital culture,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know,
No,
and
it is.
so yeah, I'll
So,
think that.
so that's, if it's there, that's a major manifestation for, in our lives.
Mhm.
Even if it was only there, and I think I don't believe it's only there. I don't think you believe it's only there. But
No.
even if it were only there, even if you're just naming a dynamic that's exclusive to it, what does it mean to be exclusive to the internet? That means we're all involved, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So what's your
I
take?
could I couldn't add anything more to that. I think that we both felt. It seems like we both had the same feeling that there's and I'm thinking particularly about our relatively recent episode on Wendy Chun, because
Mhm.
I don't think she uses the word enlightenment anywhere, but the sort of compulsive rationality, the compulsive progressivism of
Mhm.
technology. Isn't that exactly what we're seeing anatomized in Adorno and Horkheimer?
Very much.
You know, so I was seeing it like you. I was seeing it primarily, not exclusively, but primarily in the digital realm, mainly because a lot of our recent reading points to something like a structure of compulsive rationality that resembles the rationality of the marketplace, which also is also a model of compulsive totalizing rationality.
Mhm.
She talks about neoliberalism.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wendy Chun talks about
No, I think it's
neoliberalism, which
very much in.
obviously is that kind of thing. But in her arguments about digital programs and updating to remain the same, you have this insistence that we have to stay on the same path because the path is a path that is advancing us towards something.
Mhm. And again, that idea that there is always needing to be a step forward to
Forward.
progress to. Yeah, I think so. It seems to me then, and this is a happy though not unexpected thing. That's the shared concern here, right?
Yeah. Right.
So if let's I think we can wrap up and maybe just take a look forward as we wrap up here. The next episode that we're going to do is Odysseus or Myth and Enlightenment. So the idea here was to use this discussion to set the table. In our next one, we're talking about how Horkheimer and Adorno basically. How did you put it? What about bourgeois of Odysseus being a bourgeois?
Well, I mean, this actually comes up. I can't find the place, and but there's actually a sentence here in the concept of enlightenment where he's equated with where they equate Odysseus with the property owner.
Mhm.
The property owner, the status of Odysseus as a property owner, is what allows him to control servants,
Right.
etc.,
Okay. So, anyways,
and to dominate other people
right. But at a cost, and
at a cost.
we'll get to this. So, anyways, we will do Odysseus or Myth and Enlightenment. Then we will do Juliet separately, the culture industry separately, and then the limits of enlightenment separately. And the idea is that each of these arguments presents a different like cross section, different view of the dialectic of enlightenment
Yeah. Right.
that we're going
Right.
to basically
Right.
apply to where we are now.
We see, in some cases, let me just add one thing to that. In some cases, I think in fact, maybe in most cases, come to think of it, this is something we'll test out. So I'll just mention it, and it's something maybe we'll return to and test out. I was about to say that, as you mentioned, yes, we're going to see these incredible. It's a testament to the book, right? That we're, these are the test cases. These are the test cases for the dialectic of enlightenment. They include things that you would not normally include in that category, like Mickey Mouse, Hollywood film,
Right.
Odysseus, the pornography of Marquis de Sade. Not necessarily my first, my go-to discussion boards for the dialectic of enlightenment, but nonetheless, in discussing these chapters, they are intended to be case studies of the dialectic of enlightenment. One thing I would add is that in most of the cases, I think I would, and I'm gonna say this now, and we'll see how stupid, whether it fits later, and how stupid it is, but or how futile it is. But I dare say that in a lot of the case studies, we're going to see that the impasse of enlightenment might be what they're really talking about. That enlightenment can't help but fall on its feet or trip over its feet or cause trouble. That the dialectic isn't just a dialectic. Then now in the next chapter that we talk about, I think we really are going to see the dialectic of myth and enlightenment, because myth and enlightenment are going to kind of trip over each other and get confounded in. But I think when you get to Sade and Hollywood in the culture industry chapter, I think you get something more like you have enlightenment falls on its feet. It has a structural, it encounters its own structural contradictions, and it can't help but falter. I think it's going to be something closer to the impasse of enlightenment. Well, we'll see.
We'll see. We like Odysseus, we have set sail, Barry, and we are going to we're going to see this one through. So hopefully for those of you listening or watching, first of all, thank you again. We'll go through the whole cattle call here. Like, subscribe, ask us questions, engage, let's talk, let's figure out what we're doing. Share. By all means, share. But yeah, I think this is the idea here again, was that we can just sort of provide a rationale for what it is that we're doing, and then a preview for how we're going to do it, and then sort of lay out the basic underlying argument that holds the book together. So Barry, with that, and as always, thank you so much. I look forward to engaging reading over the next several weeks.
All right. Me too. Take care.
Have a good night.